thanks for joining this evening panel discussion. And let's please start. Well, it's just a conversation we'd like to encourage here. And first of all, welcome to the panel discussion about DevOps and Serverless, friends or foes. I don't know if this is an intelligent title or not, but it made at least all of you curious who are sitting here. As a short introduction, I just wanted to, first of all, of course, let's introduce our panelists, that's more important. First of all, right to my side is Michael Dowden. He is a serverless expert, a founder of some companies, a technology leader, also an advisor of our serverless conference. Please welcome him with a warm hand. Then we jump over to Sarah Hamilton, sorry, I mixed up the lines, She's also a serverless expert, AWS community builder, as I could read, and she's working at lego.com right in London, right? Please give a hand. Andrew Martin did this keynote this morning for on the DevOps side. He's a container and a security fan and obsessive for security and for containers, and also founder. And you think you're also doing a product, right?
No, there is a conflicting. There is a conflicting organization.
Hello, hello.
Is this thing on?
He's not on.
Mm-hmm.
1 second.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how about
serenade us?
Yeah. Is there resonance to that?
I don't think it's on.
So, you can think about an answer. I gave you the time by purpose, to think about.
Test.
Nope.
Yes. This is very true.
Yeah, but just go ahead, please.
Yes, we are constantly disambiguated from the other control plane, which should actually be called data plane, because they're a cross-cloud tunnel based out of Mountain View somewhere, or somewhere in that vicinity. We're based in central London, and we're pure consultancy services.
Pure consultancy. All right. Last but not least, Andrew Clay Shafer, who is a DevOps, can I say veteran? It's a stupid word, but he's one of the persons who really pushed the movement forward, who really shared DevOps ideas long before the term was coined, and he's still around helping companies to become smarter and more agile.
I try.
He tries. Please welcome all of those as well. All right. So I would like to start with a very simple, maybe very primitive chart. You know this, and you all have heard about this. This is a really kind of under-complex. Some days we just had hardware. Then we started with virtualizations. Then came containers, and then suddenly came serverless. And my personal question is, this super simple design looks like, okay, everybody would like to climb up the stack up until the upper quadrant, But what happens is not everybody really wants to go there indeed. And it turned out over the years that the DevOps movement kind of, I don't know, by coincidence or not, what came out there at the same time where cloud technologies also evolved, And of course, there's a deep relation between it, but not probably not a casual relation. And then also came the serverless community doing serverless, like the name says. And the question is, of course, are those serverless people different? Or do all of them share the same mindset, whilst maybe one group is more building their own infrastructure and platforms using Kubernetes and all these popular things, and the other saying, okay, now we'd like to take the existing platforms which are already there. These are the things we'd like to discuss. I prepared some questions with the help of our wonderful panelists, but the main thing and the most important thing is that you ask your questions. So in case you raise your hand, just ask your question, because this space is yours, right? Okay. Then, and here are some more just the keywords we can touch during the conversation. Okay, maybe we just start with a question to the more, let's say, serverless people here. We see many organizations investing huge efforts in building their own Kubernetes infrastructure. And it's fun to do that, but it's also complicated to do it, and it's expensive to do it. Why the hell should they do it? Or the other question is more towards you serverless folks. Why do you think one shouldn't do it?
My answer would be that I don't know why they would.
Okay.
Because, yeah, so I came into development maybe 3 years ago and was kind of, is it working? No. Okay, it's working for the stream, fab. So yeah, I don't know why they would build it with Kubernetes, but I'm sure that there's some really good reasons. But yeah, I came into it quite late on, like I went into serverless, and it was very much just, we do it with this, and it was really simple, and you could build applications in basically a couple of days, the bare bones infrastructure, and I really enjoyed it. So when I see things on Kubernetes and containers, it kind of baffles me a little bit, but I do appreciate that there must be some good use cases that these guys are going to argue, so.
Yeah, from my perspective, honestly, it's similar. I've never worked directly with Kubernetes. I've worked on a lot of projects that utilize Kubernetes, but I, in my role, have never actually had to interact or touch it. And to me, that's kind of part of the point of serverless, right? It's things that I don't have to deal with in my focus to get a product out the door. It doesn't mean that that's not a job that needs to be done, right? It means that I don't necessarily want my product development team working on that specific piece of infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have value. So if you look at how a lot of the platforms deploy serverless function, like under the covers, what is a serverless function? In many cases, it's actually running on Kubernetes within AWS or GCP or Azure. So there's clearly some value there. So the place where I can see value is if for some reason there's something about the built-in serverless functions that are available to you in your specific cloud provider that are not meeting your needs in some specific way, then yes, you should absolutely consider going down a layer or two and coming up with a strategy that works for yourself.
So I don't want to critique the layer thing that you put up earlier, but I think there's some interesting things to think about. I will always advocate, if and when you can go up the stack and use a managed service and it's fit for your purpose, then you should. Underneath the covers, if you're using someone else's serverless platform, they're not necessarily using Kubernetes underneath, but there's some kind of scheduling or some kind of like abstraction that's doing that. What are they doing to manage that platform for you? I'm going to wager that looks suspiciously like what you would call DevOps underneath the hood, and you're just a consumer of that service that's being provided to you. And to me, the cloud, the DevOps, whatever you want to call it, that goes back to this like Darwinian pressure. No, I never said like, oh, I'm going to do DevOps now. It was like, I'm trying to hold this thing together and deliver this service and keep it reliable and keep it scalable. And these are the practices that evolve to do that, to keep these things consistent and to keep these things, configured. And more, I think the theme for all of this is software is eating the world, right? And whenever you can, does anyone do like wordly mapping or no Simon Wordly stuff? Anyone? No? So like a real quick, he lives in London, or he lives like outside London, but the main idea is that there's this S-curve of commoditization, so that things start as innovations and they become products and then eventually become utilities. And that you have, in cloud computing, you basically have that arc being applied to computing resources, and so things are becoming more and more a utility. And the whole point of the Wordly mapping exercise is to map your value stream and then make strategic decisions about what you're going to build versus what you're going to buy. And you should never buy commodities, right? So if something is solved with a commodity solution, like you should choose that every time.
Hard to follow, but I'll do my best. So if we reverse slightly and look at the history of functionless or serverless, then we started off with lambdas that had their own foibles. You know, we had cold start issues, we had development workflow questions. Specifically, we also have this, I'm going to put a security hat on here, with this question of what happens if somebody is able to compromise that lambda, that instance of a function. Where is your post-mortem? How do you determine what was actually performed? Well, maybe you hope that you had sufficient logs, but if you look at, and you can kind of take it from that initial Lambda through to Lambda v2, which then introduced this concept of an overlay-fs type file system, which is sort of layered, looks a lot like containers. There's a sort of long-term question over, and I'll say this directly to AWS engineers, not just representatives, but question over AWS's container hostility over time. EKS did not turn up as a managed platform for many, many moons, because this question of, well, where might that workload get taken? Does it genuinely work cross-cloud? And I think
they had plenty of other container options for you.
Yeah. And so, they tried to, in my opinion, push everyone into ECS, which the Elastic Container Service, or I guess, yeah, container service, had scheduling nuances, it's probably a generous way to put it, that took some time to kind of roll out. And by that, no pun intended, I suppose. So eventually we ended up with Lambda v2, this concept of sidecars to give us security sidecars to backfill for the functions that are required to actually manage something for, and again, this is, I feel like I'm swerving the question slightly by wearing a security hat, but a highly compliant or a highly regulated industry requires eyes on everything that's happening at runtime and requires logging, but also some observability on the nature of what is being run at a system call level, maybe even sometimes the capability to just dump memory with the touch of a button from the whole thing. These are not things that you get with a fully managed service. So we go from sort of those initial Lambda v1, v2, we get into Google Cloud Run. Google Cloud Run is one of my favorite things in the whole world. So you push a container to a Knative compliant or Knative look-like interface, and you run on App Engine, which is actually running on Borg under the hood. Now, it's a different cell because you don't get direct access to the same infrastructure that Google used to run Google, but this is, it is so hyper-paranoid as a deployment that Google built gvisor, which is a full re-implementation of the Linux system call surface in Golang. There are two or three system calls that don't work, which means that it's also slightly nightmarish to get in and debug in its own way. But what's the point here? Well, Knative actually runs full end-to-end function as a service on top of Kubernetes. If you run Kubernetes with Knative, it sits on top of Istio just to add to deployment time complexity. But then you can run agents on the nodes themselves that can observe all the behavior across the system. You get a deep introspection that you can't quite get the same manner of observation with serverless. And so the answer to the question with a security hat on is deep introspection into everything that occurs in the system, which provides you a post-mortem level of incident response. You could also take it one stage further and say that some of those questions around cold starts, hyperscaling, local development workflow, they're more easily addressed with a fully, what would you say, with a system that responds in the same way on your local machine as it does in production, sort of works on my machine style. I think serverless development flows are now a lot better than they were, but just being able to spin up Minikube and have a constrained set of nodes that will guarantee provide you the same interface as you get in production is also useful homogenization of the end-to-end flow. So it's very much horses for courses.
Any questions? Please raise your hand if you'd like to add something. Please.
Serverless that I think doesn't need, and it adds the complexity. They don't have the skills, and I've seen this again and again. Like, for example, a very good example, Stack Overflow doesn't use Kubernetes, and I appreciate that. So they doesn't need it, and people who are using Kubernetes are using that website to debug Kubernetes. So, like, what I'm saying is, like, sometimes the pressure comes from the IT world to market, use Kubernetes because your hosting points are too you're not serverless. I think it should be stopped because the money is getting generated. And yeah, that's my point. What do you think?
So there's a lot there, and I also want to add something to what Andy said. So in tech, and I'm oldish, so I've seen a few cycles of this. There's a lot of decisions that are basically just fashion and tribalism more than technical merit. Mm-hmm. And so like someone read, the CTO read a buzzword in a magazine, and now that's what we're going to do. Relate to some of the themes that Andrew was just talking about, and I'd be curious to hear from both of these people. When I think about what serverless represents, to me, like the hard part of all these things that we're trying to do with the DevOps and the deployment was never trying to get this stateless thing to run over here. It's about this kind of connection to the data, and like all the architectural problems that are actually hard with respect to reliability and scalability usually go back to the databases and the networking. And what I think is very interesting about the serverless is that it gives you this, at least like the Lambda AWS version, that you have this rich data sources that fire events that then you can tie to. So like to me, like getting stateless things to run is not hard. It's that interesting bit about wiring all those events together that I think is very, very powerful. And when people get over-rotated on running functions as a service, I think they kind of miss the point of that. But going back to the comment you made, like there is historically a lot of waste in IT projects. And if you want to make any prediction on the future, whether it's serverless or DevOps or buzzwords or whatever, that fashion and tribalism will still drive a lot of these decisions, and there's going to be tons of money wasted on IT projects. You can take that to the bank.
I particularly love your comment, by the way, that Stack Overflow doesn't need Kubernetes to run, but we use it to learn Kubernetes. Like
it's all ChatGPT now.
Yeah, I mean, Stack Overflow are reputable by the fact that for many years, they were just two servers, right? Big stack of servers. They're in the kind of Backblaze and Basecamp, like anti-populism tech, run by a very small selection of very, very highly skilled engineers. And I don't think most organizations can duplicate that. The other extreme of the spectrum that you're referring to is, what's the shiniest thing? What's the thing that makes your sysadmin become a DevOps engineer or become an SRE or a platform engineer? It's just buzzword bingo, CV++ driven development. But these are real financial market pressures that do genuinely get people more money. It is just a rebranding, a different lens on the same thing. Perhaps those four particular, not quite the case. But in terms of the sort of fundamental skills and the individual who can fulfill those roles, they should be able to move towards them, but generally just put on a different hat and don't go from, DevOps to SRE is a good example because Google define SRE really quite tightly. And platform engineer, actually probably, you're using more and more programming skills as you're ascending from system administration through to classical computer science development. But just to re-anchor that question, there is this issue of cargo culting. There's a secondary issue of market pressures about what people will pay money for, and fundamentally, a lot of neurodivergent people like shiny things and probably struggle to escape that as well.
I don't know if this is the right point to make, but I'm going to make it anyway, which is like Stack Overflow is an example of, like, it's not a particularly complicated application. There's things that become complicated as you scale, and certainly moderation is its own nightmare. But from a computer science perspective, it's basically just a CMS. Right, like you're putting this stuff, and not all the things that people need to solve are the same. And when we talk about DevOps and the evolution of some of these conversations, the very first kind of DevOps conference and the conversations that were happening around, the Flickr thing about putting Paul and John Allspaw together, the problem they were trying to solve is how can we put more cat pictures on the internet? And that's a very different problem to solve than if you're trying to deal with money and people's transactions. And then I'd say there's even more of a spectrum as you get into systems that are dealing with life and death. and what is appropriate from like a process perspective and overhead perspective on one end of that spectrum, putting cat pictures on the internet or making like a CMS is different than it might be on this other end. And so you should be mindful of the context that people are trying to solve problems in.
Oh, I 100% agree with that. And one of the things that absolutely makes me crazy at tech conferences is when people say, well, Facebook is doing this and Netflix is doing this, so you need to do that. You aren't Facebook or Netflix, and quite frankly, their entire systems could go down and it doesn't really have that big of an impact on anybody. So think very carefully about doing what you're not at their scale, and you probably are working on a system that has more uptime implications than theirs does. And so, yes, the applicability of what you're working on is super duper important. Like, I'm a huge serverless advocate. I love serverless. I think that it is something that most developers should become at least somewhat experienced with, even if it's not what you're using on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for every application, and you should never ever use a technology that is wrong for your application for any reason, especially not because it's the shiny new thing, right?
But it is the shiny new thing. And
it is.
Really, really wanted to play with it.
Please.
There was a lot of people saying serverless means no ops. What do you think about that?
Lol.
Well, I think that isn't quite true. But I would say that the things that I work on, so we very much have lots of small services that each individual team will look after. And we look after our own DevOps. And I kind of just see that as my day-to-day engineering job. I don't really see myself as someone who's skilled in DevOps. I just know how to write like GitHub actions, know how to deploy my stack to CloudFormation, and know how to debug an issue if it goes wrong. And at the Lego Group, we do have an infrastructure team who, if things get really difficult, we'll call on them to help because they are experts in this sort of thing. But day to day, I don't think I've gotten to them for like a back-end service in ages. The front end is a little bit more tricky. Like I think we're trying to get there a bit more. We don't have as regular deployments, but with our back-end services, I do think that it's like super easy to do DevOps, and maybe that's my naive viewpoint, but I haven't worked somewhere that uses containers and has huge DevOps teams. So it's like hard for me to understand what goes on there. But yeah, I think it's pretty cool that we can kind of do it ourselves as a serverless person. Yeah. How about you guys?
Well, one of the consequences that I've seen from the DevOps movement, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing, it's just been a side effect, I guess, is all of the operations people that I know do more development now than they did 5 or 10 years ago. Every single developer I know now today knows more about their deployment environment than they did before. And we're coming to the middle. And there's good things about this, right? Because as a developer, if I really understand my execution environment, there's benefit to me knowing that really well. If you are somebody who is managing servers and you truly understand what's running on those servers, right? You can optimize better. There's a lot to be gained from here, but it's gotten really hard for us because there's so much more that we need to know and learn and understand now that it's kind of a little bit harder for everybody to keep up with the whole spectrum of what it means, like to be a full stack engineer, for example. It's really hard. So
there's two things that make me either laugh or cry, and they were both just mentioned. So one is this notion that if you do serverless, there's no ops anymore, which is, I think, provably false if you try to do any of this stuff.
I agree.
And the other one is full stack developers, which I don't believe exists, which is the stack is too deep and too wide. And you know, certainly there's certain things that you could do across all those things, but you want to be able to reach out to those other experts. And you know, if I give anyone any advice related to my own career, it's that you can build a network of experts. Like you don't have to be an expert in every single thing. Sometimes those are people inside of your organization. Sometimes those are people outside of your organization. And one of the things that I really appreciate about how this has evolved over the last decade is we live in this global community of practice that are people solving all these different things, and I can go into those communities where those experts are, and usually, open source projects or whatever you want to talk about, they're relatively helpful, and they want to share their expertise, and they want to share that. So that's a superpower I think everyone should develop. As much as you can go to Stack Overflow or ChatGPT, is find those experts in your network that can help you solve those problems.
I definitely agree that it's like best to be an expert in kind of one area, but also that, well, I've just kind of heard at friends' companies that you have like front-end developers, back-end developers, and then they just never seem to be able to meet in the middle. And then you have DevOps, and we just chuck it over the fence to them, and then a month later it comes back.
But this is like missing the whole point of what DevOps was intending to do in the first place, which is remove the walls of confusion between all these different roles. And so you have walls of confusion between the front end and the back end. You have walls of confusion between the developers and the operators. You have walls of confusion between security and the rest of these people. So the security and the compliance people aren't on the same page. And then you get to like salespeople or whatever, and who knows where they live. But the end of the day, to me, like I never really loved the word DevOps, but to me it's about the system that you're optimizing, and that's a socio-technical system, and all of those different personas have their own kind of understanding and selfish interests, and to what extent can we get all those different perspectives and selfish interests focused on the fact that we have a collective interest and that we want to serve this mission or this organization in the best possible way.
So I'm not allowed necessarily to pose questions, but if you don't mind.
You are.
What do you think of the job title DevOps, right? Often critiqued.
DevOps engineer.
Yeah.
So in many presentations that I gave for a long time, I would put, I basically kind of make fun of that and say that I consider it an anti-pattern. And in particular, kind of going back to the comment she just made, if you think that you have a problem between this silo not communicating with this silo, putting another silo in the middle is not going to solve your silo problems, right? So I think it's in some ways an anti-pattern, but then in other ways, once people have kind of gone down that, I kind of like you can't just like fight everyone. Like you have to figure out where they are and like help them. That in some of these organizations that are complicated and their CTO read the article and got the buzzword and now they have a DevOps team, like meet them where they are and figure out like what is that team going to do, right? And then you get into these organizations where they have a DevOps team and an SRE team and they don't work together. And now they're going to have a platform engineering team and they don't work together. So it's like, what are you, you're just like layering and layering on top of it instead of reconciling like to me, I think of everything as an engineering problem. Going back to blog posts I wrote in 2010, really related to the comments you just made, is in 2010, you're 4 years into having Amazon, you can do lots of provisioning and kind of like infrastructure stuff with an API. I was working on Puppet at the time, and you could do lots of configuration stuff. You're starting to have these tools that would let you do like a lot of API-driven monitoring. So now all of these things that used to be kind of like manual tasks the sysadmin did was writing to an API, writing to an API, writing to an API. And writing to an API looks suspiciously like software development. And my background was a software developer. It's like, well, let's use all these tools and all these processes that we had from Agile and version control. I mean, that's such a huge step forward in so many organizations. Like, let's just version control the bash scripts. Like, let's just start there. And like, oh, but we're not developers. Like that, when we used to work on Puppet engagements in the late 2000, like 2009, 2008, whatever, like you'd have sysadmins are like, I'm not writing code, that's what developers do. It's like, bro, you wrote bash all day. What are you talking about? But there's just like this weird tribalism that makes people kind of do these things and then say, oh, like that's not what my tribe does. I'm not that thing. And so if you have a DevOps team and you've got some budget and some funding and a raise out of that, like go do that. And if you can get a new raise out of being a platform engineer, like go to town. But at the end of the day, like, is that fit for your organization's purpose? Are you building that socio-technical system that's optimized for the mission that you're trying to fulfill?
Any questions here from the room? Please.
Could you speak to the question of vendor lock-in around this?
So a question around vendor lock-in.
That's another good rant. I think vendor lock-in is almost always a red herring. Not that there isn't something to be thoughtful about, but optionality is never free. And your biggest lock-in, in almost all cases, is the code you wrote, your legacy code that you're locked into. So do be mindful about things. And if you're getting, I think the reason people got spun up about vendor lock-in is that the golden age of IT empire building was a lot of abusive relationships with their IT vendors. And you know, there's certain companies, and we won't name names today, but I feel like the only real innovation they've had in the last 10 years is in litigation and like contract review. And so that kind of drives some of that conversation. But when you really get down to it, I think it's a bit of a red herring, and that you should be modeling what's the cost and the benefit and the utility of this thing, and that the optionality is never free. And if you're trying to write all these things that are abstracted so you can move them all around, like you're not taking advantage of some of these other things you could be getting value out of.
So I have a term that I picked up only recently, which really resonated with me, which is data gravity. And talking about vendor lock-in, often you're talking about, well, which particular supplier am I using for X, Y, Z? Data gravity is more, how much investment have I made in terms of probably bits, bytes, terabytes into generally a specific cloud, but it can be any back-end storage.
Some of the comments about abusive vendors might have to do with databases.
It was noted, yes. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they could do that is the data gravity. That's what's hard. And it goes back to the comments I was also making about why I think serverless is interesting about having these event sources from the data sources.
Yeah. So, I mean, the question really is, what is the nature of the product that one is being locked into? And if it's, I mean, there's some form of vendor lock-in when you choose a specific distribution of Kubernetes to go in that place, or a specific database, or a specific SQL dialect. But there is far greater data gravity with moving all of your data processing into a specific cloud. And I mean, there's great data processing options like Google Cloud, Bigtable. Those things are like help to define a specific type of data processing. And Azure now obviously has the whole the ChatGPT, just to reference it approximately every 3 or 4 minutes. Make sure our shares work out. Yeah, is the amount of GPUs they've thrown into there. Obviously, AWS have been dealing with massive sharding of data. I mean, the TLA proofs for S3 are astounding. Like some of the weird edge cases that they get, because they're just pushing the nines, trying to get as much redundancy and resiliency for your data as possible. What does that mean? Well, ingress is so cheap, but egress super expensive. So yeah, it is. I mean, say optionality is never free. It is a luxury that we have sufficient market competition to breed innovation amongst the incumbents. It does also leads to a problem in some cases where so many of the systems that we consume are so sort of slightly sub-infinitely complex that it seems unlikely that you can make too much of a play in those spaces as a non-multi-billion-dollar seed founder. But yeah, as you say, it exists, and at least we have the option.
Any more questions?
I'm locked into my marriage. I'm locked into my mortgage. I'm locked into my car payment. And I could change all of those in theory, but like on balance, I'm going to keep going.
I think that like being at the Lego group, we're particularly focused on protecting our brand, and data is like a huge part of it. And GDPR, we take extremely seriously. So I'm actually working on consent for Lego.com, and I'm actually really proud to say that we don't do anything dodgy with the data. Like, it's really cool. And then when people say vendor lock-in, I'm like, well, you've got to pick something, and AWS is great, and they're not going to raise the prices. So I just have, for a while, had the opinion of vendor lock-in's not a thing. But then I was talking to some people, and they were saying that actually it's not really to do with the price. It's more to do with the fact that, was it like the Screms? I can't say it properly. Some litigation that happened with Facebook. I don't know the entire details, but I'm sure you will probably maybe know. But basically, even if you have your data put in like an EU region, the US government were able to kind of buy some of that data. And so for our kind of company, it is like kind of dodgy, and it's not something that we have a solution to, and I don't think many people do. So you just kind of have to pick one and go with it. But I think it's kind of a work in progress. But yeah, that was something that I learned quite recently. Maybe everyone knew that, but
not specifically, but certainly shipping some particular classified projects, the biggest project risk was the Patriot Act. Very difficult to defend against. Everything comes with a balance, so it's entirely understandable.
On the other side, related to that, in some cases, there's regulations that require organizations to at least have like this contingency that they could move different providers. I've never seen that done particularly well, and I've never seen that done particularly cheap.
yeah, I feel like there would be a huge cost associated with that.
For sure. Well, like one of the things that's often missed in the discussion about vendor lock-in also is the idea that the more things you do inside of a single ecosystem, often the more efficiencies you gain from doing that, right? So, and it doesn't even matter if we're talking about serverless. Let's not talk about serverless for a minute. Are you in Vue, React, or Angular for front end? Does it matter? No, but you're going to pick one and you're going to do everything in that, because as soon as you have all three of those spun up across your organization, you're spending a lot in knowledge set and having to have completely different libraries in many cases. You're doing so much to maintain the weight of three completely different approaches. Same thing is true with serverless or any cloud, right? If you go all Google or you go all Azure, you go all AWS, you gain some benefits from the fact that now all these services are designed to work together really, really well. And so one of the things you lose—
Ostensibly.
Well, ostensibly, you're fair. It says so right on the tin. But you gain some benefits there, so you lose those benefits when you try to break vendor lock-in, in addition to all the costs associated with building your own layer on top of what they've already optimized.
Here's a question.
We need to be a bit conservative, just to keep in mind not to be too much vendor lock, because at one point maybe leadership decides, you know, the big three companies are super impressive and you know, getting the human to their cloud, so they're going to make huge discounts. So at one point, as a DevOps or as an infrastructure platform or whatever, you need to have that, you know, maybe leadership is going to make me in 1 or 2 years move from here to here, you know. So maybe if I invest too much and then take advantage too much of AWS or a feature that AWS has but Azure doesn't, maybe after a specific point, it's going to be a real pain for everyone for me to migrate. And let's be real, they say you have sufficient time to move the workload, but in the end you have just a few months. So in that few months, you really need to re-engineer everything just to move from A to B, and then live for a long time with this re-engineering to kind of survive and then maybe improve. So I think vendor locking is still something that you need to be a bit conservative, because you never know where leadership points to. Like you said, CTO goes for golf match, and then here's yeah, but my pay less, so you need to come to me. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
It does, but also look at the language you chose. When you said we're not taking advantage of this thing we could be taking advantage of, at what expense are you not taking advantage of that thing so that you can protect this imagined scenario when you have the real thing that you could be taking advantage of? And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer there, but I also say, you know, right now, if you're worried about the whims of your leadership making bad decisions and like moving things between clouds, you can also move yourself between companies.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and two of the things that kill projects the most are premature optimization and YAGNI. You're not going to need it. You're building something before you know what you need, or you're trying to optimize for a problem before you understand what it is you're trying to optimize to.
Andrew, I'd like to come back to fashion and tribalism. You were kind of explaining or describing kind of I would say a persona, somebody who is well informed, is well connected with a community of practice, as you said, and this puts this person into the position to have good decision, whatever that means. Yeah. How does this clash on the one hand with the people who are there? Are they used or are they prepared for acting like that? And secondly, how does this clash to the nature of the organization you are meeting? Yeah, because we've heard lots of about organizations which kind of, well, do not allow that kind of things. Or what do you think about that context?
So there's a long history of a bunch of these things, and maybe you'll get to hear some of that when I give my talk on Wednesday.
Nice.
But the way I think about this, and the way like I thought of DevOps and Agile before that, is like, what's my competitive advantage? And what I came to realize after going into a lot of organizations and kind of giving them what I thought was the best advice and the best tools for whatever Agile practice or whatever DevOps practice or what have you, is that they get drastically different results. Given the same information, the same tools, they would get drastically different results. And what I came to realize is that the only sustainable advantage is learning. And that's at an individual level or an organizational level. And I'm going to define learning here as the ability to take new information and manifest new behaviors. And a lot of organizations, for a variety of reasons, get new information, but don't necessarily change the behaviors. And in particular, when we're talking about a lot of the fashion and tribalism and the buzzwords, what you see over and over again is they simply adopt the language and change almost nothing with their own process and procedures. So to the extent that an organization has, for whatever reason, prevented itself from changing its behavior, then they're on the slow path to obsolescence. And so, this is in some of the other talks I gave before. You're either building a learning organization or you're eventually losing to someone who is. No one's entitled to their business model. And if you are an organization that fosters your own ability to grow and learn, then that's the right place for you, wherever you are right now. And if you're not, then maybe you should look for somewhere that is. And if you're a leader, then the opposite is true. Or like, to what extent can you empower your people to be that sensor network? Right? Like, I feel like the most highly evolved, high-performing organizations are not the ones where the decisions are made because a CTO read a buzzword in a magazine, but they're taking advantage of the practitioners at the lowest level ability to practice and do that work and bring that back into the tribe, and thinking themselves as a single tribe instead of like, oh, we're the dev and we're the ops.
So I agree with everything you just said. But because of that, I'm actually going to disagree with what you said about there being no such thing as a full stack engineer. I would actually go to the other extreme and say that if you're employed as a developer, you are probably a full stack engineer. And it doesn't mean that you know everything, but what it means is that you are actively and aggressively working to expand your knowledge in both directions from whatever your core skill set is, until you know so much in both directions, both towards the user and towards the server, that you can manage an ever-expanding list of things.
So I agree with the spirit of your argument, and what I'll say is I believe in the human ability to learn and the human desire to learn, and that any one of us should be able to manifest expertise in any part of the stack, but that it's very, very difficult for any of us to be an expert in all parts of the stack. That's my main argument.
No, and I totally agree. No, none of us can be experts at every part of the stack, but one of my concerns with the industry right now is that it's getting to the point where that's almost the expectation in a lot of organizations, and that's something that we need to kind of work around. Because you're correct, we can't all know everything. We have to have experts.
We're slowly running out of time, so keep in mind we should do another 5 minutes, something like that. But Jay, you got a question?
So I think related to what you guys were just talking about, I feel like there's like this differentiation between like serverless being very focused on developer experience, DevX, and some of these other questions being more about DevOps issues, where like operations still comes into play. And it seems obvious to me that there's some advantages to the serverless for the DevX experience, but when we see kind of the ongoing battle with things like ML ops and data ops, and those being real concerns for organizations, how do you balance these kind of different, like, is serverless just too overly focused on developer experience to the isolation of a lot of operational experience? Or is DevOps just too, focused on operations, and we shouldn't care about operations anymore?
That's a really great question, and I think the answer is that serverless is very focused on developer experience, but it is also fairly focused on kind of optimizing things that work together well. So just because serverless doesn't solve your problem today doesn't mean it's not going to solve your problem in 6 months. In fact, this has been a recurring theme as I've been working through serverless over the last few years. I can't tell you how many times I ended up having to build something for myself, only by the time I finished building it, it was freaking in the platform and I was able to just use what was in the platform. It's just, that's the rate of change right now. It's literally faster than I can build it, it's getting added to the platform, to the point that in many cases now it's like, I'm gonna wait 3 months, I can wait 3 months for this feature because I bet that it's coming, and sure enough, there it is, and I start using that new service. So it kind of depends on where you are as an organization. What are your time frame demands? Where are you at right now? And again, serverless isn't for every use case, but it's a pretty good default place to start. And especially, and when you go back to that whole learning and wanting to move quickly and learn new things, I find that serverless is a really great default way to start. You build a new thing, you experiment, you play around with it, and then only if you find that there is a problem or an issue or a challenge that doesn't suit your specific use case, then you look for another approach to get around that. But otherwise, you're just prematurely optimizing and you're doing too much work in advance, in my opinion. But
I can argue with Jabe all day, every day. I kind of want to connect back to something you said and you said, where you said, like, we basically operate this stuff as developers. If you look at the evolution of, we'll call them the cloud natives or the big web, in every case, you know, Netflix, Google, Amazon, they all go through this phase of you build it, you run it, for new services especially. Then, you know, Google got this kind of like further evolution where if you pass the PRR and you get the kind of like architecture in line, then the SREs will start to take call for you. But they all go through that, and I think that is a feedback loop that allows you to get to optimize for some of those operations, and so like that false dichotomy between ops and dev or whatever is sort of like out of the way when you take ownership. Like what you really need to, as an organization, to take collective ownership of the outcomes you're trying to drive. That's what, to me, starts to fix all these problems, right? When you get organizations where it's like, oh well, we did our job. It's like, yeah, but the whole organization failed. That's what's broken. And like the titles and the rest of it doesn't matter. As long as you can align those outcomes.
Last question from the audience.
Can I ask something? Very random question. Security question.
Just do it.
Oh God.
This kind of discussion I'll have with my buddy on economic design. What I think is Azure, Google, platform, or AWS, as a hacker perspective, that's still good. Everything is, for me, I'm a hacker.
hypothetically.
Yeah.
The only way to reduce that is Microsoft, Google, and Amazon hire hackers. And I personally think it's going to be a biggest disaster because hackers are very at the top level. And I think something will happen in the future, personally, that's going to take all the data from there until
Oof. Okay, so multiple levels there. First of all, do public clouds self-assess their own security posture with offensive internal teams? Hell yes. They're typically known as red teams, and they behave offensively against an internal organization. Yes, there is, absolutely. There is a higher order concept that I will probably refer to loosely because I don't know how public knowledge is, called a red cell, which is not only are we red teaming the organization, we've also got internal documentation to work off. So it's like a crystal box test is what we call it as a defensive security function. A black box test is you can't see what's inside, you're attacking APIs, you might be closing your eyes and trying to figure out what's inside. White box is like you have everything available and you know the thing inside out. Crystal box is a kind of mixture of the two. You have the documentation, and it's sort of broadly analogous to a white box anyway. So yeah, this red cell concept from friends of mine in these organizations never failed to pop the golden jewels of an organization. Now, every time someone complains because they've been able to chain multiple strange buffer-style behaviors in undocumented protocol, needs documenting, whatever. So the first question is, does this exist, and is it a beneficial feedback loop? Absolutely. It's there is a question as to what the particular tonality of the hacker's hat is as well, because we would say that a white or a gray hat hacker is working positively, whereas a black hat hacker is probably difficult to security clear unless you've already been arrested. And then finally, finally the question of, is there one central big beautiful lake into which one can dip their hackery hat and leave with data from multiple different organizations, multiple different tenants of the public cloud? Broadly not, because things are encrypted based upon client identity in some way. So even, and this is the most insidious of threats, insider threats are so difficult to deal with. And insider threats in a public cloud, this is how Capital One got breached, the poster child for internet or AWS security. And this individual knew about an IAM overprivilege for a web application firewall, knew how to exploit a server-side request forgery, and was able to exploit that SSRF, take this overprivileged IAM role, and start pulling S3 bucket data. Now, that S3 bucket internally, I don't know anything about the implementation, but one would assume that your keys are certainly linked to the customer, maybe at some extra level of depth as well, so that when they're sharded across multiple domains, you can't breach different geographic regions in one go. And again, this is not from an API level, this would be from an infrastructure access level. So that person just used all the APIs, privileged information, ripped everything out. So insider threat is highly dangerous, of course, and it's very, and it's a really interesting one to reconcile with DevOps, of course, because we're looking for not only least privilege, but also a reduction on a reliance of separation of duty, so that people can actually do multiple roles. We're talking about which full stack backend engineer, et cetera, requires access to multiple different Git repos to start off with. If you're using GitOps, that then fans out to far greater complexity. So it is not the case of just pulling a hard drive from a server rack will get you access to everything on it. Things are far better sharded and delineated from encryption terms.
I want to add one nuance to his question,
yeah.
or kind of like the way he started the premise. Do you actually think that the public clouds are less secure than most of these enterprise data centers?
Again, this is all visually documented on YouTube. The levels of physical access that you have to get through just to get into these places. We're talking about custom fabs. The hardware they're using is dealt with from a completely different supply chain to the one we see publicly for our CPU infrastructure and microcode. So yeah, I believe public clouds operate at a far higher.
I think they're more secure.
Level of assurance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think they're more secure.
The only thing you'd lose out on is FedRAMP, which just comes in right at the top, because then you've got extra guns.
All right, I think time is it's pretty late. I would say please give a warm hand to our panelists. Yeah. And I think you had we heard some inspiring comments. I think you got some answers to your questions. I think it was a personally interesting conversation. Thank you so much, and enjoy the evening, and see you tomorrow.
Thanks for having us. That's fun.